Where's Adam direct to? My God, he's flying north.
A Boeing 737 is badly off course.
Adam 574, confirm our position, please.
The crew struggles to get the plane back on track.
This is crazy!
They're lost in a violent storm when their plane starts rolling over.
Pull up! Pull up!
The lives of 102 people are at risk.
Adam 574, Yuja on control.
Then, mysteriously, Adam Air Flight 574 disappears without a trace. January the 1st, 2007, Surabaya, Indonesia. It's New Year's Day. There are celebrations throughout the country. Surabaya's airport is bustling. And not just because of the holidays. Indonesia is experiencing a boom of budget airlines. Many people are taking advantage of the cheaper fares.
For the average Indonesian, it meant that the explosion of low-cost carriers made it much more possible to actually get on a plane and fly.
One of those new airlines is Adam Air.
Good afternoon, departure. This is Adam 574.
Adam 574, this is ground control. Go ahead.
Adam Air was successful because it provided a fresh image to the industry. I mean, they came in with, bright colors. The airplanes were painted in fantastic orange. The crew was, flashy uniform. They had everything right going for them.
Captain Refri Widodo has been flying with Adam Air for 6 months. Today, he's in command of Flight 574, a short domestic flight. His co-pilot, Yoga Susanto, has been with the airline for almost a year and a half. Before the discount travel boom, many passengers wouldn't have been able to afford this flight.
More and more people were able to fly, could afford the tickets, and they didn't care too much about the services offered simply because they just were intent on getting from point A to point B as cheaply as possible.
There are 96 passengers and 6 crew members on today's flight. Controllers at the airport are busy juggling planes.
Okay, Adam 574 is clear for takeoff.
80 knots. Check. V1. Rotate.
Today's flight is a routine 2-hour hop. From Surabaya on the island of Java to Manado on the island of Sulawesi, almost 1,700 kilometers northeast. It's the beginning of the rainy season. Weather is unpredictable. Forecasters are expecting fierce storms. Captain Widodo is aware that there may be bad weather ahead.
Turn right direct to Fando and climb to flight level 330.
Roger, turn right, direct to Fando and climb to flight level 330, Adam 574.
Minutes after takeoff, the crew turns on the autopilot. The flight computer will fly the plane and navigate it along a pre-planned route to Manado.
Now passing flight level 220, climbing to flight level 330.
Roger, Adam 574, track direct to Diola.
Confirmed.
Tracking direct to Diola, Adam 574.
22,000 feet below, air traffic controllers track the flight's progress on radar and confirm that it's on course. The plane is beginning to experience some turbulence. Less than half an hour into the flight, air traffic controllers notice something out of the ordinary.
Where's Adam direct to? My God, he's flying north.
Flight 574 has flown off course and is now heading into a violent storm. Air traffic controllers don't know why.
Yes.
On board the plane, the pilots try to understand how far they have drifted off course.
The IRS. 28 is the difference.
And try to fix the problem with the computerized system that handles navigation.
May I have your attention? This is your captain speaking. We are about to experience some turbulence.
Could all the passengers return to their seats?
Controllers on the ground try to get Flight 574 back on course, giving them directions to their next assigned waypoint called Diola.
Adam Air 574, maintain 350, direct to Diola.
Confirmed, flight level 350, direct to Diola, Adam 574.
But to get there, Flight 574 must pass through a severe storm. "137-kilometer-an-hour winds beat on the plane's hull. It's pounded by hail and rain. The weather is making it hard to see. The crew is not just concerned with the weather. They're still also trying to understand the problem with the plane's navigation system.
This is messed up.
Getting lost over the ocean is everyone's worry, because when you lose your navigational instruments or you lose trust of your navigational instruments, what do?
Co-pilot Susanto consults the aircraft's handbook.
It's starting to fly like a bamboo ship.
Captain Widodo doesn't know where he is. He needs directions.
Confirm our position. Adam 574, confirm our position, please.
Roger, Adam 574, position is 125 miles. Mike, Kilo Sierra, crossing radial 307.
Mike, Kilo Sierra.
The weather in Mike Kilo Sierras isn't good.
The storm is growing worse.
This is crazy. We're going to get lost if it stays like this.
Captain Widodo wants to take over navigation of the plane from the flight computer.
Okay, put the IRS in attitude.
But suddenly, a warning. The autopilot has disengaged completely. Then many of Susanto's computerized instruments go blank. The crew doesn't notice that their plane is rolling over. Flight 574 is banking at a dangerous angle.
They enter this.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle.
If it rolls too far over, It could send the plane and the 102 people on board into a fatal downward spiral.
Okay, put it back on nav again. Put it back on nav again. Put it on nav again.
Captain Widodo wants to re-engage the flight computer's navigation system. The plane is still rolling, and now its nose has started to point downward. Another alarm tells the pilots that they are entering a steep descent.
Don't turn it. This is our heading.
Adam 574, Yujung Control. Adam 574, Yujung Control. Adam 574, radar service terminated. Please contact Yujung Control at 128.1.
Inexplicably, Flight 574 has disappeared. News of Adam Air Flight 574's disappearance spreads quickly. The Indonesian government starts mobilizing search and rescue teams to find it. First Air Marshal Edi Suyanto will coordinate the search and rescue.
Pada tanggal 1 Januari 2007.
On the 1st of January 2007, I received a verbal notification from the Vice Assistant Operation Head of Air Force that Adam Air had not landed in Manado.
Belum mendarat di Manado.
Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, or NTSC, is also notified. The NTSC is responsible for finding out what went wrong in any plane crash. Franz Wieners is in charge of investigating Adam Air 574.
The first steps that we take when there was an accident or serious incident, we will find all the resources that we have and get the team together before we dispatch to the area.
Working with air traffic control, the searchers try to pinpoint the last recorded location of Flight 574.
Mendapatkan laporan juga bahwa
I received the report that Adam Air was lost from the radar in the Majin Sea.
Laut Majeni.
The plane was last detected by radar as it was crossing the sea, about halfway through its intended journey.
Okay, so right around here.
But the plane could have flown hundreds of kilometers after that signal was received. It's impossible to pinpoint the exact location.
When the aircraft went missing, it was a bit of a shock for everybody because in this day and age, nobody expects an aircraft to go missing.
Without a specific location, searchers try to figure out how large an area to scan. Since they know how much fuel was on board, investigators can calculate how far the plane could have flown since it was last detected.
If this is their last radar hit, they didn't have enough fuel to fly any further than this.
More than 3,000 people are sent out to look for the plane. The Indonesians are joined by a US Navy vessel. But the area they have to search is the size of Ireland. The teams don't even know whether to look on land or on water.
And as long as there was no definitive word, hope remained.
12 hours pass without any confirmed sightings. And then friends and relatives' hopes are raised with news that survivors have been found.
A new report came in saying that they had found the Adam Air wreckage in the mountainous area of Polowali, with 100 victims and 12 survivors still alive.
Rescue teams hurry to the island of Sulawesi, hoping to return survivors to their families. They also hope to discover what went wrong on board the plane.
When news broke that some people might have survived the crash, the already incredibly stressed and emotional families of the survivors thought, whoa, maybe there is a chance. Maybe my wife, cousin, husband, brother has survived.
But when the first officials get there, they find that these survivors are not from the flight at all.
So they were ferry survivors, not airplane survivors.
They're from a ship that sank in another storm near where Flight 574 is thought to have crashed. Now the rescue teams are back to square one.
It led people's hopes up. And people flocked to Makassar and they were finding ways how to get to the crash site, only to find that it's not there.
For family members, it's a bitter disappointment.
Sebetulnya kita malu.
We were ashamed because the information was already spread all over before we verified it. Our government was embarrassed that we publicized that information.
It's been a week since the crash. With each passing day, the chance of finding any survivors grows smaller.
There was still no clear picture of exactly where the plane had crashed and how it had gone down and why it had gone down.
Venus needs to locate the wreckage as soon as possible. Most of all, he needs the 2 black boxes that record conversations in the cockpit and flight data. There are beacons attached to the boxes, but they only have a 30-day battery life. 9 days after the crash of Adam Air Flight 574, a fisherman finds what he thinks might be part of an airplane, 300 meters off the coast of Sulawesi. The piece is taken to an Indonesian Air Force base for analysis. Franz Venus quickly identifies that it is part of a Wright elevator. He examines it to see if it belongs to Adam Air Flight 574.
We checked with the serial numbers, we checked with the part numbers.
The numbers match.
So we are definitely sure that it is from the aircraft.
The finding confirms that Flight 574 crashed at sea. The team can now narrow down its search to the area where the elevator was found. Since the accident involves an American-made plane, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board joins the investigation. And they send structural engineer Clint Cruikshanks to Indonesia.
We started working with the NTSC to look at radar data, air traffic transmissions, weather data, trying to bring all that information together to find the airplane.
The water that investigators plan to search for wreckage is 6,500 feet deep, much too deep to send down divers.
It was quite deep water, deeper than we're normally used to recovering airplanes from.
The Indonesian government wants Adam Air to pay for the salvage operation. Investigators meet with representatives of the airline.
It is going to be expensive. We need to hire contractors to go down that far.
Adam Air felt that its responsibility only went so far. The government and most of public opinion believed that Adam Air's responsibility was actually almost total because they were the owners of the airline.
The airline refuses to pay for the salvage, triggering a lengthy negotiation. This is not good news for Franz Venus. Unless someone puts up the money to search the seabed for wreckage, the mystery of Flight 574 will not be solved. It is also a blow to the families of the victims.
The families obviously wanted to know what had happened to their loved ones, and they did want the government and Adam Air to combine to get the flight data recorders out of the water.
As the investigation stalls, public anger grows.
People were becoming more and more critical of Adam Air and the way it was being run.
But then, after 7 months of negotiating,
This is good news. Thank you.
Adam Air agrees to help pay for the salvage. Phoenix International, an American company specializing in deepwater salvage, starts the operation on August the 24th. But the time they've lost has had a serious consequence. Although they have a fix on the location of the crash, the locator beacons attached to the black boxes have gone dead.
If the black boxes are not found, it will be a mystery until today.
Without the beacon, finding 2 small boxes among the wreckage will be a huge challenge. To make matters worse, Adam Air has only put up enough money for 1 week of searching.
So it was like, go out there, if you don't find anything in 7 days, you're done.
After locating debris with sonar, an unmanned remote-controlled submarine is sent down to look for the black boxes.
How we doing?
We dove on one location first. We got to that GPS location. There was nothing there.
Pull up quadrant 3.
So we sat down and decided we'd do a grid search about that point. And so we did a very methodical search.
Okay, 3 degrees. All right. Slow, slow. We're coming up on something.
We started picking up small, lightweight pieces of airplane wreckage. Things like life vests, seat trays, light bits of metal.
Oh my God, this is it.
Investigators get their first look at the wreckage.
This plane is ripped apart.
The state of the wreckage illustrates just how violent this plane crash was.
The little pieces of wreckage didn't tell us anything about the cause of the crash. They did tell us, however, that the airplane hit the water at a very high rate of speed. This was the most fragmented airplane that I have ever seen.
Only 2 days into the operation, Cruikshank spots something.
All right, stop. Rotate back 5 degrees.
I noticed on the left side of the video screen something that appeared to be orange, and I instructed the ROV operator to take a closer look at it.
That's it. That's it. Okay.
Once we got over there, we realized that, yeah, this in fact was the FDR.
The plane's flight data recorder has been found.
All right, good work, Joe. Let's get this up.
We were very excited that we had seen and recovered one of the boxes.
Investigators soon find the cockpit voice recorder nearby.
All right, stop. That's it.
Their week is up. The salvage operation is over. Investigators now hope that they have all the clues they need to solve this accident.
The black boxes is the only source for the evidence that we have, because we don't have the wreckage, we don't have the witnesses.
But the boxes have been lying on the bottom of the sea for almost 8 months. They could be damaged beyond repair. They may not yield any information at all. The black boxes from Adam Air Flight 574 are taken to the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C. Investigators think the labs there are the best bet at salvaging any possible information.
If an FDR is found in salt water, it needs to be washed in fresh water and then contained in water the entire time until it makes it to our lab.
Salt and air together create a chemical reaction that results in rust. The rust can damage the electronic components in the recorders. Keeping them submerged in fresh water delays that reaction.
The The importance of having the data depends on the circumstances of the accident. If you're able to recover wreckage in other parts to investigate, then you don't necessarily need to rely on the data. For this particular accident, since the wreckage was going to stay at the bottom of the ocean, it was essential that we had data from the recorders.
Franz Wieners also makes the trip to the United States.
The FDR and the CVR, when they were recovered from the bottom of the sea, the cases were actually 50 or 60% damage.
We thought there might be an issue in recovering the data. It wasn't as damaged as many others we've seen, so we were fairly confident if there was data recorded, we would be able to get the data off of it.
Technicians begin the painstaking process of retrieving the information. The job is a multinational effort.
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau was requested to assist. We have an excellent relationship with the NTSB folk, and so our flight recorder specialist went to the United States and worked alongside the NTSB.
The electronic components containing the data are carefully removed and dried. Then the information is uploaded onto a computer. As the delicate procedure of recovering the data from both recorders progresses, investigators are aware that they have an additional concern.
As you can tell,
one problem that we ran up against in this investigation is the maintenance records indicated that the flight data recorder was written up as being inoperable in the weeks prior to the crash. We were concerned with that in that if we found the FDR, it may not have recorded anything.
Investigators keep their fingers crossed.
we've got it all. It's all there.
I was confident once we found out that we had 100% of the data that we would be able to solve this accident.
The two black boxes provide investigators with the first solid clues about why Flight 574 fell from the sky.
Good afternoon, departure. This is Adam 574. Now passing
Flight level 220, climbing to flight level 330.
Roger, Adam 574. Track direct to Deola.
Confirmed, tracking direct to
Deola, Adam 574.
The conversation in the cockpit tells investigators that the crew knew that the plane's navigation system was sending them off course.
The IRS.
28 is the difference.
They're drifting.
And that they were preoccupied with fixing that problem.
This is messed up.
Where's Adam direct to? My God, he's flying north. Adam Air 574, maintain 350, direct to Deola.
Confirmed, flight level 350, direct to Deola, Adam 574.
To get from one waypoint to the next, the flight computer always has to know the plane's exact location. That information comes from a component called the IRS, or Inertial Reference System. It tracks every adjustment to the plane's course to calculate its exact position. It then feeds that information to the autopilot.
The autopilot needs to know where the aircraft is and where it needs to go. Now, the autopilot takes those data from the IRS in terms of height, heading, and speed.
But for the system to keep track of the plane's heading, it has to know where the plane started. The IRS has to be calibrated before takeoff. Usually, the crew will enter the coordinates of the gate as the starting point for the computer to track. Investigators wonder if the IRS guided the plane off course because the wrong initial coordinates were entered.
We just got this.
They check this by looking at information from the flight data recorder.
The numbers are fine when they're on the ground.
Yes.
The data confirms the IRS was calibrated before Adam Air Flight 574 took off.
This is where it begins.
But for some reason, the IRS began to send the plane off course almost as soon as the flight got in the air.
It just gets worse and worse.
I have something else I'd like to show you. Some maintenance logs.
Cruikshanks and Wiener look at the maintenance history of the IRS system that was on board Flight 574.
As you can tell, there's more than 100 write-ups here. Look at this.
Same unit. Same problem.
That's right.
The history shows that there had been numerous complaints about the plane's navigation system over the past 3 months.
Again and again.
Investigators wonder why the airline didn't fix the problem.
In the case of the IRS of this aircraft, that unit should have been taken out and sent to maintenance for calibration or repairs.
Investigators discover that when pilots complained about a faulty IRS unit, the airline didn't fix it properly. They would either swap it with a unit from another plane, or often they would only do a basic cleaning of the malfunctioning unit.
They just pull up the connectors, spray it with some lubricant cleaners, then put it back on, did some ground test, and then just put ground test OK on the maintenance log.
Since the IRS is such a vital piece of equipment, this is contrary to all recommended repair policies. Investigators listen to the cockpit voice recorder, hoping to discover how the malfunctioning IRS contributed to the crash.
This is crazy! We're going to get lost if it stays like this.
Don't turn it! This is our heading! Pull up! Pull up!
But nothing they hear leads them to believe that an IRS malfunction alone could have caused the plane to crash.
If you have a failure in one system of the airplane, it shouldn't cause an accident.
Investigators now wonder if the severe storm Flight 574 flew into somehow played a role in this crash.
This is messed up. This is really messed up. It's starting to fly like a bamboo ship. Confirm our position.
Weather is a well-known cause of airline accidents. It can wreak havoc with the airplane and disorient pilots. In 1977, a Southern Airways DC-9 flew into a violent storm near New Hope, Georgia.
Our left engine just cut out.
Hail clogged the engines. They tore themselves apart.
Got the other engine going too.
Brace for impact!
The plane slammed into the small town, and 72 people were killed. In order to determine if weather was a factor in the Adam Air crash, investigators need a more complete picture of what happened on board the flight. They want to know everything the crew did and said from the time they discovered that they were off course to the time they hit the water. To do this, they combine the data from the two black boxes to create a computer simulation of the flight.
That gave us very close to the possibility of what really happened with the aircraft.
Investigators return to Jakarta to study the simulation.
The weather in my Kilo Sierras isn't good.
This is crazy! We're going to get lost if it stays like this.
They can see that throughout most of the flight, the computer was navigating the plane. But since the flight computer was sending the plane off course, the captain decided to navigate the plane himself.
Okay, put the IRS in attitude.
Co-pilot Susanto switched the navigation system to a mode that would keep the plane flying straight and level. Captain Widodo could now change his course.
This is where they switch from nav to attitude.
Switching from one mode to the other forces some computerized gauges to temporarily go blank while they reset. One is the ADI, or Artificial Horizon, which tells the crew if the plane is flying level.
ADI goes off and stays off.
There was also another much more serious consequence to the switch.
That's where the plane starts its right roll.
The autopilot disengaged when they consciously selected from the nav mode to the attitude mode, and then the aircraft commenced an almost imperceptible roll to the right of around about 1 degree per second.
The captain missed a crucial step when he switched his flight computer from one mode to the other.
Quick reference handbook, please.
He should have flown his plane straight and level while the computer adjusted to the new setting.
Maintain straight and level, constant airspeed flight until attitude displays recover. Approximately 30 seconds. It's in the manual.
Any pilot who is trained and qualified on the Boeing 737-400 is regarded to have a sufficient knowledge that whenever they switch the nav mode to attitude, they have to maintain wings level for 30 seconds.
But neither of the pilots did that. It's an oversight with grave consequences. Without that step, the autopilot disengages completely. The flight computer did send out a warning when that happened, but the warning was ignored. The crew didn't seem to notice that the autopilot was no longer flying the plane. And it only took seconds for that to become a very serious problem. The data tells investigators that this plane had a natural tendency to roll to the right. Old planes, like old cars, don't always go straight. Throughout the flight, the autopilot compensated for that by raising the aileron on the plane's left wing. An aileron is a movable flap on the wing that controls how much the plane rolls to the left and right. But once the autopilot disengaged, it stopped compensating and the ailerons went back to a neutral position. That allowed the plane to revert to its tendency to roll to the right.
And they don't even notice.
At this point, the plane was rolling at a rate of 1 degree per second. Focused on their faulty navigation system, and with thick clouds obscuring the horizon, the pilots had no idea that their plane was dipping. It's not uncommon for pilots to get disoriented in this way.
Your body will start to fool you. Your senses will start sending you false information or false senses. You might think that you are actually going straight and level, while you're actually rolling slowly to the right or to the left.
The 737 is programmed to issue a warning when it rolls past 35 degrees.
Bank angle, bank angle, bank angle.
The flight data recorder shows investigators that in response to that alert, Captain Widodo did attempt to level the plane.
They get an oral warning from the airplane that says, hey, bank angle, bank angle. And at that point, they made some small inputs to the controls, but they didn't fly the airplane.
Believing that the autopilot would keep the plane level, Widodo soon turned his attention back to the problematic IRS.
When the pilot engrossed with troubleshooting of the IRS, their ability to pay attention for the other tasks is reduced. Further, these IRS anomalies has become the only priority at the moment.
Usually you would say one pilot deals with the system issue, the other pilot flies the airplane. They were both dealing with this system issue and totally focused on the issue, so they never saw what was happening.
This is not the first accident involving what we would call spatial disorientation.
It was almost 3 years earlier to the day that another flight, Flash Airlines 604, taking off over the Red Sea, had a similar fate.
See what the aircraft just did?
Distracted by a malfunctioning component in the cockpit, the captain may have become disoriented.
Autopilot! Autopilot!
Like the Adam Air flight, the captain's attention was focused on his flight computer. And like the Adam Air flight, his plane began rolling dangerously to the right. Investigators concluded that without any external references, the captain simply couldn't tell that his plane was falling from the sky.
Tragically, just because there is an inertial reference system failure, or let's say in another accident there might be an engine failure, does not mean that an aircraft has to crash.
It's 60 degrees now and there's no attempt at recovery.
Don't turn it! This is our heading! Pull out! Pull out!
Investigators can see that when Captain Widodo does take action, he makes the situation much worse. With his plane still banked drastically to the right, Captain Widodo should have leveled his wings and then pulled his nose up. He did the opposite. He began pulling back on his control column before his wings were level. That forced the plane into a tight spiral dive.
Basically, it rolled, and it just kept rolling until it almost went inverted and just fell, it kind of fell out of the sky once it got to a point where it wasn't flying like a normal airplane should.
The aircraft was descending at nearly 900 kilometres an hour at a vertical speed at times reaching in excess of 21,000 feet per minute.
That's almost the speed of sound, and more than 150 kilometers an hour faster than this plane was designed to withstand.
It's rolling over rapid descent. They can't recover now.
At that speed, the plane is no longer able to hold itself together.
And that sound, that's the sound of the plane coming apart.
The black boxes have revealed how Flight 574 crashed. But they also raise crucial questions.
It's just one error after another.
There was ample opportunity, ample time for the pilots to correct the situation.
The investigators have come to a disturbing conclusion. The only mechanical failure was with the plane's navigation system. And that shouldn't have caused the crash. The more significant failures were human.
Okay, put the IRS in attitude.
But why should qualified pilots make these disastrous mistakes?
Don't turn it! This is our heading!
To find these answers, investigators must look at the airline itself. This one accident will raise serious questions about Indonesia's entire aviation industry. Investigators turned their attention from the actions of the pilots on Flight 574 to the airline that employed them, Adam Air. They meet with the owners.
France wins.
Adam Air was founded in 2002 by a wealthy businesswoman named Sandra Ang. Ang named the airline after her son, Adam, whom she also appointed as the company's president.
We need to know more about your training program.
The investigators interview Adam Air pilots.
Did the airline provide any training on recovery procedures in the event of an IRS failure? No.
They want to find out more about how the airline trained its flight crews.
What about recovery techniques? IRS troubleshooting? No?
What they uncover is disturbing.
We could not find any evidence that the pilot was properly trained when they have a sudden disengaging autopilot or when they're flying with the IRS failure.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
As they dig deeper, investigators find an airline plagued with safety issues. 11 months before the Adam Air crash, in February 2006, another Adam Air plane, Flight 782, flew off course the same way as Flight 574. That crew was also getting faulty navigation data. But they couldn't even reach controllers on the radio. They couldn't get directions. They were badly lost for 3 hours.
The crew was trying to find where they were. The ATC was trying to find where they were. And they were over the water.
Like Flight 574, they had a malfunctioning IRS. In the end, the plane landed almost 500 kilometers south of where it should have been.
They just continued until they found an island. And it had an airport in it, and they said, okay, we have to land there, otherwise we don't know where we're going to go. And they landed, and they didn't know exactly where they were until they landed.
6 months after Flight 574, the European Commission banned all Indonesian airlines from flying to Europe.
That sent a very strong message to the whole world that we, the European Union, believe that all Indonesian airlines are unsafe and you should not fly on them.
Then in March 2008, there's another accident involving Adam Air, this time in the city of Batam.
And the airplane slewed off the runway, came to rest on the side. The evacuation was a bit strange. Nose lights were deployed, and that was a final accident. And after that, I think everybody said, enough's enough, you know.
People who did care, people who were wanting to shake up the industry and reform it and improve it, were horrified that the situation had been so bad within Adam Air and that the authorities had allowed such a situation to continue and deteriorate.
Immediately after the crash in Batam, the Indonesian government suspended and then ultimately revoked Adam Air's license to operate. It is also apparent that Adam Air isn't the only Indonesian airline with problems.
Prior to the Adam Air crash, Indonesia experienced a bad crash about every year to 18 months.
Many of those accidents involved the discount carriers that the government had allowed to thrive. More than 50 such airlines were in operation at the time of the Adam Air crash.
The problem, though, was that this expansion occurred in a way that was not properly monitored, not properly regulated by the government. Thousands and thousands of people are being employed to work for airlines when they just don't have the experience to do so and are not being adequately trained, as the investigation report into the Adam Air crash demonstrated.
Indonesia's poor safety record forces the government to take steps to improve airline safety throughout the country. It begins rating airlines on safety and grounds those that don't comply. There have been fewer fatal incidents since the reforms. But a year and a half after it was put in place, the European Union's ban on Indonesian airlines was still in effect. Those familiar with Indonesian aviation think the reforms could go even further.
So that we have no more Adam Airs, we have no more companies that cut costs too much and gives all these extra risks to the public, because that's not what the public should receive. The public should receive a reliable and safe means of air transportation.
Halloween, 1994.
You haven't heard any more from this controller chick, huh? No, not a word.
A commuter plane circles outside Chicago, waiting for clearance to land.
Eagle Flight 184, descend and maintain 8,000.
8,000, Eagle 184.
Without warning, the controls snap to the right. The plane plunges straight for the ground. The behavior of the crew and the air traffic controllers would be examined. Pilots would question the safety of an airplane.
The airplane will have a nasty tendency to go out of control.
Investigators travel the world for answers. The crash makes Roselawn one of aviation's darkest words.
Mayday, Mayday.
It's mid-afternoon on October the 31st, 1994. American Eagle Flight 4184 left Indianapolis, Indiana 15 minutes ago. It's heading to Chicago. There are 68 passengers and crew on board.
Happy Halloween, cowboy.
Flying through the clouds, the aircraft begins to experience some turbulence.
I'm gonna keep them in their seats in this chop. No sense in taking chances.
Captain Orlando Aguiar is in command of today's flight. It's supposed to be his day off. He volunteered for this flight to make extra money. His wife is expecting their second child.
Let's see if we can get above this. Center, any chance Flight 184 can climb to 16,000?
First Officer Jeff Gagliano is handling the flying duties on this leg of the flight. He programs the autopilot to climb to a less turbulent altitude.
Jeff actually was working on his dad's ranch in Wisconsin just before he came in for that trip on Halloween that day. Getting on a horse or getting in an airplane, those were two of the things that Jeff loved most.
Flight 4184 is an ATR-72, a groundbreaking new aircraft built in France. Cost-efficient and comfortable, the plane has become popular on short runs. This flight is just one of 5 short hops the crew will be making today. It's Amanda Holberg's first day on the job as a flight attendant with American Eagle. She's paired with Sandy Modaf, a seasoned veteran. Aguiar and Gagliano have flown this route countless times and know it by heart.
When you're flying from Indianapolis to Chicago, you're flying through some of the busiest airspace in the world.
As Flight 4184 approaches Chicago O'Hare, the pilots begin the descent to 10,000 feet.
Chicago Center, we have discretion down to 10,000. We're on our way down now.
In Chicago, controller Michelle Willman is returning from a break. The trainee controller is still working under the supervision of a monitor. She's told that traffic into O'Hare is facing potential delays because of weather. She will have to be prepared to put some flights on hold.
Operations into and out of O'Hare are handled on a priority basis. It's not necessarily a first-come, first-served basis. International flights arriving to O'Hare because of their fuel status get priority, and then the turboprops come in at the end.
Eagle 184, hold southeast on Victor 7.
Chicago Center, roger. Hold southeast on Victor 7. Eagle 184.
Flight 4184 must now fly a racetrack-shaped holding pattern over northwestern Indiana.
Chicago Center, Eagle 184. Entering the hold.
Eagle 184, roger.
Aguiar programs the autopilot to keep the plane circling at 10,000 feet.
I'll go up front, see if they want anything.
The crew has little to do as they wait for air traffic controllers to give them permission to land.
Can I get you boys anything?
I'm good.
Stereo? Oh, you don't have a hard job.
We do have it pretty easy. This thing gets a real high deck angle in these turns. Yeah. We're just wallowing in the air right now.
You want flaps 15?
We'll bring the nose down.
Sure.
I guess Sandy's going ooh now.
See y'all.
All right.
The crew needs to let the airline know about their delay. It could affect the rest of the day's schedule. Crews use text messages to communicate with dispatchers, so they don't tie up radio frequencies.
Shall I let them know how much fuel we got?
Sure.
Space, F-U-E-L, is that?
We got 3,600 pounds. Well, folks, once again, this is the captain. I do regret to inform you that air traffic control has put us into a holding pattern up here. We're holding for approximately 20 minutes out of Chicago at this time. I do apologize for all the delays.
That's much nicer. Flaps 15.
Sure, once they let us out of the hold and forget they're down, we'll get the overspeed warning. I can't hold anymore, man.
We got plenty of gas. We could be up here for a long while.
Hey, bro.
Yeah.
I'm getting busy with the ladies back here.
Oh.
Yeah, so if I don't make it up there, say the next
15, 20 minutes, you know why.
Okay, when we get closer
To the touchdown, I'll give you a ring.
Oh, no, I'll be up right now. You haven't heard any more from this controller chick, huh?
No, not a word.
Eagle Flight 184, descend and maintain 8,000.
down 8,000, Eagle 184.
Eagle Flight 184, should be about 10 minutes till you're cleared in.
Thank you.
The flight is allowed to descend.
Are we out of the hole?
No, we're just going down to 8,000.
Then a warning.
I knew we'd do that.
The plane is going too fast to fly with its flaps extended.
I was trying to keep it at 180.
Gagliano retracts the flaps. There's a strange sound coming through the fuselage. Suddenly, the control column turns sharply to the right. The controls won't budge. The plane is falling from the sky. The pilots begin to recover control. But then it happens again.
It was coming down too steep to even try to land. It was coming down at a sharp angle, a real sharp angle.
Flight 4184 has crashed into a field just outside Roselawn, Indiana.
Oh my God, they're dead. They have to be. For the speed that it was coming down at.
Hundreds of volunteers arrive at the crash site to offer help, but there's nothing they can do.
There was not much to see of any airplane. You couldn't see no cabin or anything of the airplane. There just wasn't anything left of it.
Both pilots, the 2 flight attendants, and all 64 passengers are dead. The Roselawn crash would soon become one of the most important accidents in aviation history. It will lead investigators to new conclusions about a string of older crashes. The morning after the crash of American Eagle Flight 4184, a team from the National Transportation Safety Board is on the scene just outside Roselawn, Indiana. Greg Fife is the lead investigator.
The morning that we arrived at the accident site, it was cold, it was overcast, it was one of those drizzly, dank days. All you could smell was the Jet A or the kerosene fuel, and because it was muddy and wet, you had that odor or that aroma of dirt. And so with all of those smells, that really evokes some emotion there. And now you have to walk through that field and actually start to do your job.
The crash site is soaked in jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. Human remains are scattered everywhere. The site is declared a biohazard.
With 4184 was one of those types of accidents where there was very little left of the airplane.
Investigators know that the way the wreckage is spread out can tell them how the plane hit the ground.
Because there was a fan-shaped debris pattern and it was spread out over a very large area, we knew that the impact was very shallow, but at a very high speed.
The airplane's 2 flight recorders are found intact in the tail. They're taken to the NTSB's labs for analysis. The data on the recorders could provide the clues investigators need to solve the mystery. But extracting the data takes time. In the meantime, investigators look for the location of key pieces of wreckage.
The first things we typically look for are the 4 corners of the airplane.
The NTSB's Bob Swaim leads that search.
You're looking for the nose and the tail and the 2 wingtips, because if you can tell where the 4 corners of the airplane are, you get an initial idea of whether the pilot was in control or not.
The plane's 4 corners are far from each other. The nose and cockpit are completely destroyed. This tells investigators that the plane hit the ground nose first in a shallow but rapid descent. The fact that the plane wasn't in a steep descent on impact indicates that the pilots had some control in the final seconds before the crash. They just ran out of room to pull up. Investigator Bob Swaim, meanwhile, has recovered some of the plane's instruments, including its attitude director indicator, also known as the artificial horizon. It's a key instrument that tells pilots if they're flying level. If it malfunctioned, it could have misled the crew and caused them to make mistakes.
We had a pretty good idea of the attitude of the airplane at impact, so it would really help at that point to see if the pilots had the same view of the flight that we found as they hit the ground.
Hit the lights for me, please.
A lot of the cockpit pieces use a fluorescent paint or something similar, and when they contact each other, little bits of the paint transfer. If we look at those with a black light, we can see things that the naked eye cannot see.
There's a good imprint here.
The force of the impact has left tiny scratches on the shattered instrument. Swaim discovers that the attitude indicator seems to have been working. Its final readings show the plane was leveling off. The instrument coincides with the plane's actual position on impact.
It indicated that at least the flight instruments that the pilots would have been looking at were appropriate, they were proper, that the pilots had something to fly by.
The discovery means that the pilots knew their plane was diving towards the ground. Investigator Greg Fife is getting a clearer picture of the flight's final seconds. Now he wants to know about the history of this flight before it fell from the sky.
One of the elements of the investigation, of course, was to look at air traffic control.
Eagle 184 holds southeast on...
Fife learns that Flight 4184 had been in a holding pattern southeast of Chicago for 39 minutes before the crash.
When we looked at the air traffic control records, we found that the flow rate, that is, the number of airplanes that were going into Chicago O'Hare at the time, had to be reduced because of the weather moving through the area.
Well, folks, I do regret to inform you that air traffic control has put us into a holding pattern up here.
And because of the reduced rate into Chicago, we knew that 4184 was going to have to hold for a very long period of time.
I do apologize for all the delays.
One of the aspects that we found was that one of the controllers in the facility was relatively new. They were considered a trainee.
Had an inexperienced controller put Flight 4184 in peril? Chief Investigator Greg Fife wants to know more about the weather conditions along the holding pattern.
I want weather data, pilot reports, its atmospheric conditions, its Doppler radar, anything you can find.
Flight 4184 wasn't the only plane circling O'Hare that day. Several other planes were also on hold. They all landed safely. Interviews with the pilots of some of those planes give investigators an important clue.
One after another, they all experienced icing, some as much as 3/4 of an inch.
Many of the pilots report the same thing: ice. Dr. Marsha Politovich works at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. She's one of the leading experts on icing and the danger it poses to aircraft.
It essentially changes the shape of the wing while you're in flight. It creates drag, it reduces lift, it causes performance and handling problems, and it's just not a good thing to have.
Investigators examine weather records from the day of the crash. They find a disturbing pattern of reports of icing all along a cold front near Chicago. But the reports describe the icing as light to moderate. Perhaps the size of the commuter plane was a factor in this crash.
Yeah, different planes respond to icing differently. A large plane will respond differently than a small plane. Reasons for that are both environmental and having to do with the airframe itself.
large jets generally fly above the dangerous conditions inside a cloud. But the ATR-72 can't do that.
Smaller plane can't fly as high. They're stuck in the icing environment for longer. They may not have de-icing equipment, and if they get in trouble, they may not have enough excess power to get out of it.
Investigators discover that Flight 4184's holding pattern took it through layers of cloud repeatedly. Each time it would have been exposed to icing conditions.
4184 we knew had been holding in an icing event. There were layers of clouds that they had been flying in and out of.
Steve Frederick was flying out of Chicago on the morning of the crash. He flew through the same treacherous weather.
Each time that I went through that cold front during that day, the weather was intensifying, the ice was getting worse, and I was getting more and more concerned.
Frederick asked his captain to pass on a warning about the weather, so that other pilots would be alerted to the danger.
I found out a little bit later that my captain had never warned dispatch, and these pilots never got the warning about the ice that was out there that day. And there's no feeling in the world that can compare to how badly I felt at that moment.
Greg Feith knows that controllers had put several other planes into a holding pattern near Chicago. But they all landed safely after coming out of the hold. This means the controller had not put Flight 4184 in jeopardy. She acted correctly given the information she had about the weather.
One of the issues about air traffic control is that the controllers can't just look at their radar screen and identify areas of precipitation or icing conditions readily. The controllers don't know that an airplane is sitting in icing conditions unless the pilot provides them with what they call a PIREP or a pilot report. So if the crew, in this case, 4184, doesn't provide that information to the controller, then the controller doesn't know that an icing event actually is occurring out there.
Feith and his team wonder if the flight crew simply didn't realize they were flying into icy conditions. The plane's cockpit voice recorder provides the answer.
Can I get you boys anything? Cereal? You don't have a hard job.
You do have it pretty easy. Hey, bro. Getting busy with the ladies back here? Oh.
At first glance, the crew's behavior seems unprofessional and undisciplined.
The first officer was listening to some music. We knew that there were a lot of non-aviation things going on. One of the most contentious elements was how did that affect the crew's performance and their awareness to the situation that was starting to develop.
Well, that's much nicer now, flaps 15. Yeah. Showing some ice now.
But 9 minutes before the crash, the crew had noticed their plane was picking up ice. The pilots must have been aware they were flying through an area of aircraft icing.
You haven't heard any more from this controller chick, huh?
No, not a word.
Then, 2 minutes before the accident, another remark draws the attention of investigators.
Still got ice. I see what you mean.
The crew knew about the ice. Now investigators need to know what they did about it. The ATR-72 is equipped with sophisticated de-icing devices. It's crucial to know what the crew did about the ice buildup on their wings. This time, the flight data recorder provides the answers. Almost 17 minutes before the crash, something sets off the master caution warning. It could signal a problem in one of the plane's systems. It could also mean the electronic ice detector is picking up the presence of ice. The flight data recorder shows investigators that in response to the alert, Captain Aguiar turned the plane's de-icing system to its maximum setting. The NTSB's Charlie Pereira looks into the performance of the ATR-72.
The icing alert system had sounded orally, and they heard it, and they activated protection systems on the airplane. And at the time of the accident, the de-ice systems were on. The complete ice protection system on the ATR-72 airplane consists of a combination of what we call anti-icing, which are hot surfaces that don't allow the ice to form, windshields, and the propellers are also heated on this airplane. And then they have de-ice systems, which are on the leading edges of the wings, what are called pneumatic boots. They're like rubber inflatable chambers that you blow air into and they expand kind of like a balloon, and that cracks in the ice, and then the ice flies off the airplane.
The flight data recorder shows that after he activated his de-icing system, Captain Aguiar also pushed the throttle forward slightly, increasing the plane's speed. This increased the speed of the air moving over the plane's wings, making it harder for ice to settle there. The pilots had done everything they could to deal with ice buildup on the plane. But were the anti-icing systems actually working? The shattered remains of that de-icing system are now the main focus of the investigation.
The airplane was designed in France by a group of French and Italian companies. The de-icing system was part of that design. So the components were made by small French vendors who were located around the countryside, and then they were assembled there in Toulouse into the final airplane.
Bob Swaim arrives in France with pieces of the de-icing system.
Brought some pieces from Flight 418 to look at.
The key component to the de-icing system is probably not the black rubber boot that you see on the airplane, but the timer that's inside the airplane, or the timers and the valves that control those boots.
The force of the crash has left telltale markings called index marks. They show the position of the valves at the time of impact. Swaim compares them to the original blueprints.
Does anything seem out of the ordinary?
The trip to France has led to yet another dead end. There was nothing wrong with the plane's de-icing system.
Thanks a lot, appreciate it. Thank you.
Investigators are puzzled.
Showing some ice now.
If the crew knew they had ice on their wing and their de-icing system was working, why did the plane crash? Other pilots think they know the answer and decide to speak out. Their decision will dramatically change the course of this investigation. Three weeks after the crash near Roselawn, Indiana, American Eagle pilot Steve Frederick distributes a warning. It says the ATR-72 fleet operated by American Eagle is dangerous in icing conditions. It claims American Eagle pilots have pleaded with the airline and regulators to do something about it, but to no effect.
I drafted and distributed a brochure in Chicago O'Hare Airport, which essentially warned people about the problems with the ATR aircraft and made an outreach to the public in order to try and get something done because nothing was happening.
Steve Frederick has more than a professional interest in the crash of Flight 4184. Co-pilot Jeff Gagliano was his close friend. They graduated from flight school together. Gagliano's death has hit him hard.
He made the comment one time that he would probably wind up dying because of ice in an ATR. And it was eerily prophetic.
A month after the crash, pilot frustration over the ATR's airworthiness boils over. A group of a dozen pilots refuse to fly, citing risky weather. The airline is forced to cancel flights. And then Steve Frederick goes one step further. He voices his concerns on a US network morning show.
We were told this airplane will try and kill you. If you get too slow in ice, the airplane will have a nasty tendency to go out of control. When I came back to flying after my appearance on Good Morning America, I was summarily suspended without pay.
The public protest leads investigators to wonder if the ATR-72 has a deadly vulnerability to ice.
Merci.
Investigator Charlie Pereira visits the ATR's French manufacturer, Aerospatiale, to learn more about the plane's history.
We embarked on a research effort to try to identify all previous ATR 42 and 72 roll control incidents.
He finds a disturbing pattern.
And about five of those were found to be similar after the fact in our review to the Roselawn case.
One such incident took place in December 1988 in Mosinee, Wisconsin. An American Eagle ATR 42 had been preparing to land in icy conditions at central Wisconsin Airport.
The airplane was on approach in severe icing conditions, described as freezing drizzle and freezing rain.
Captain Mike Bodak was the pilot that day.
We were just on the last two legs of our trip before we'd be done with work. And we were doing our descent. Everything was proceeding normally.
Negative ice, just wet. Call the flight center, let them know we're turning inbound.
I hear in the tail a sound like that, but it just got louder and louder. We have no idea what is occurring. I thought initially a propeller blade may have come off. It was as if the steering wheel wasn't connected to anything.
The plane stalls. Its wings can't generate enough lift to keep it in the air.
As I see I'm not getting any of the airplane back, I come up on the power levers all the way. The engines are now really trying to fly. And at this point, I'm getting some of the airplane back, so I make a forward motion to try and break the stall. And it's still going terrain, terrain, and I don't have the airplane back yet. And my first officer says, and I say max RPM. He throws the props from 86 to 100%. And instantaneously, boom, we fly out of the stall.
The plane is less than 1,200 feet above the ground. Captain Bodak has learned a sobering lesson about the ATR.
There was no warning. The plane stalled without any warning. Planes do have warnings for stalls, but in this case, there was no warning. I got the first warning that I was in a stall was I was in a stall.
But other pilots weren't as lucky. An ATR-42 operated by an Italian airline was flying over the Alps en route to Germany in October 1987. The plane lost control and crashed in the mountains, killing all 37 people on board. Ice was the main factor, but the final report blamed pilot procedures.
For investigators, it's really important to look back at historical information about any airplane. You want to look for trends.
What they would find is a troubling detail with this plane's history.
Did any of your studies uncover a wing design flaw?
Charlie Pereira wants to know if the engineers who built the plane could explain why an ATR-72 would go so badly out of control. To his surprise, he learns they knew that it had a susceptibility to icing.
You've seen the flight data from the accident flight. Where would the ice have formed to cause that?
When I asked one of their oldest, most senior aerodynamicists who couldn't speak any English at all, what he thought would be the shape and location of an ice accretion that could cause the behavior that we saw on the flight recorder for the Rosalon airplane. He drew up the airfoil section, a little shape just behind the de-ice boots, and said this was it. And the translation was that this is what will cause this problem.
After the de-icing boot.
Investigator Charlie Pereira is beginning to understand how ice can affect the wings of the French-built plane. If the ice built up behind the boot, the crew would have no way to clear it.
Still got ice.
And even a small amount of ice can have a devastating effect on an airplane. Ice can disrupt the smooth movement of air over the wing. But how could so much ice build up behind the boot? Investigators contact Dr. Marcia Politovich for assistance.
The NTSB called us to help them analyze weather conditions in this case.
Her research shows that the pilots of Flight 4184 likely flew into something they'd never even heard of. Something even more dangerous than ordinary ice.
Now, based on the weather analysis, it looked to us like the kind of icing that plane encountered was from supercooled large drops. Now, large is relative. What we're talking about large here is about the size of a human hair.
Supercooled large droplets are about 100 times smaller than a raindrop. They form inside storm clouds when the temperature is near freezing. But the drops don't freeze until they come into contact with something solid, like the wing of an airplane. Conditions that day were ideal for the formation of these tiny freezing droplets.
We had all the clues that we needed, a warm cloud top, -8 to -12 degrees C. We had drizzle formation near the top that was probably encouraged by some wind shear near the cloud top, and very little ice in the cloud, from what we could tell.
On every lap of its holding pattern, Flight 4184 flew through layers of cloud that hid a small but lethal element.
They just put that poor guy in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Investigators learned that supercooled large droplets have a distinctive way of accumulating on an aircraft wing. Ordinary ice accumulates on the leading edge of the wing, where de-icing boots can get rid of it easily. But SLD act differently. These supercooled drops hit the wing and slide back over it before freezing. This forms a ridge behind the boots, out of reach of the de-icing system.
So as 4184 was flying in that type of environment, rather than the water droplet freezing on the protected surface of the de-ice boot, it actually ran behind the de-ice boot and froze on the metal surface.
The pilots can't get a good view of their wings from the cockpit. They would have been utterly unaware of the danger taking shape.
For the pilots, when they looked out their side window, they would see the outer portion of the wing. They definitely could not see the top of the wing where this ice ridge was starting to form.
For Greg Feith, the investigation is coming to a head. His investigators think they know why Flight 4184 crashed, but they can't prove it. To make matters worse, the plane's manufacturer suggests that the Rosalon crash wasn't caused by an ice buildup, but by poor piloting.
The NTSB thought it was an aircraft problem, and the French aircraft manufacturer thought it was a pilot problem and not their particular product.
Feith wants to know if there had been problems with ice on ATR-built planes in the past. He finds troubling similarities between some incidents dating back decades. Using data from flight data recorders, investigators look at aileron movements from Flight 4184 and compare them to the other incidents. They discover that on all those flights, the aileron deflected in exactly the same way.
There's no input at all from the pilots.
We knew that all of these ailerons were being commanded to move, not by the pilot, but in fact the disrupted airflow created by the icing event that the airplane had encountered.
The physics of ice buildup explains why the control column on Flight 4184 snapped to the right. Air turbulence on the wing was so powerful that it lifted the aileron, which caused the plane to roll. Since the aileron is attached to the control column by a cable, it jerked the control yoke to the right. The force of the turbulence pulling on the aileron was so great that even two pilots trying to countersteer weren't able to bring the aileron back down.
The forces were determined to be about 250 pounds, so for the pilot, it would have been trying to roll against 250 pounds of aerodynamic force.
Worse, the ATR's control yoke doesn't have power steering, so those forces are transmitted directly to the pilots. The pilots could not fight back against the air pulling on their aileron. For Chief Investigator Greg Fife, supercooled water droplets that left a ridge of ice on the wings are now the prime suspect. But how to prove it?
Now the real analysis began because we had to understand what was going on in flight with the airplane. We had good flight data recorder information. It only told us what happened, didn't tell us why it happened. We had to try and model this icing event some way.
At the time of the crash, NASA was just beginning to study the effect of supercooled large droplets on airplanes.
Back in 1994, pilots didn't know what SLD or supercooled large droplets were. There was very little information in the pilot community, and there was actually very little information in the aviation industry about SLD.
Investigators first turned to NASA for help. Together, they launch a daring experiment. They use a US Air Force tanker plane to create a cloud of supercooled water droplets. An ATR-72 flies behind the tanker. Yellow dye in the water shows investigators how the droplets cover the plane. The test should solve the final mystery. How had ice caused Flight 4184 to go so badly out of control?
One of the primary purposes of flying the ATR-72 in behind the tanker was to understand how the ice accumulated on the airplane, but more importantly, the effect of that ice in varying configurations of the airplane on the flight control surfaces, that is, the ailerons.
Investigators make a startling discovery. A seemingly harmless action meant to increase comfort on the plane may have led to disaster.
Can I get you boys anything?
I'm good.
While American Eagle Flight 4184 was holding, Captain Orlando Aguiar notices that the nose is tipped quite high.
This thing gets a real high deck angle in these turns. Yeah.
Captain Aguiar knows that the plane's high nose angle was producing an uncomfortable tilt in the passenger cabin.
You want flaps 15?
I'll bring the nose down.
Sure.
Extending the flaps would have the effect of lowering the plane's nose, making the ride more comfortable.
I guess Sandy's going ooh now.
When investigators duplicated this maneuver, they found that it had a dramatic effect on where the ice ridge formed on the plane's wing. The flaps made the icing problem even worse.
By exposing more of the upper surface of the wing to the oncoming water droplets, and that's one of the reasons why we got the ridge of ice where we got it, was because of the flaps 15 configuration.
That's much nicer now, flaps 15. Yeah.
The crew of Flight 4184 is unaware that a ridge of ice, more than a centimeter high, has built up on the surface of their wings.
Eagle Flight 184, descend and maintain 8,000.
Down to 8,000, Eagle 184.
The ice buildup has no effect on the flight until First Officer Gagliano begins his descent to 8,000 feet.
I knew we'd do that.
The descent increases the plane's airspeed. This triggers a warning from the flight computer telling the crew they're flying too fast with the flaps extended.
I was trying to keep it at 180.
Gagliano now retracts the flaps. But the routine gesture has a dramatic effect on the plane's aerodynamics.
When they retracted the flaps, as they started their descent down to 8,000 feet, the airplane pitched back up into a very nose-high attitude.
Airflow over the ice-laden wing was disrupted when the nose lifted back up. That created the turbulence that pulled up the ailerons, sending the plane into a roll. The plane stalled and tumbled from the sky.
Had this crew had about 2,000 to 3,000 more feet of altitude, there's a high probability that they would have been able to salvage or recover the airplane before it struck the ground.
The NTSB has uncovered a deadly flaw in a popular airplane. There's a growing concern that unless something is done, this kind of accident would soon happen again. Investigators conclude that problems with the ATR's wing design make it vulnerable to this menace. The agency that regulates U.S. aviation takes drastic action.
We are going to issue an airworthiness directive this afternoon that will preclude the operation of these aircraft into known icing conditions.
The FAA takes swift action, banning all models of the aircraft from flying in icy conditions. This throws regional airlines like American Eagle into chaos. Public concern over the safety of ATR airplanes grows in the aftermath of the Roselawn crash. The most controversial charge, that the FAA had relied on the French authorities to test and certify the aircraft, then rubber-stamped the results.
Therefore, the ATR-72 was never really tested by the FAA in any way, shape, and form as though it was manufactured here.
The plane's French builder proposes to fix the problem by making the de-icing boots wider so they cover a larger part of the wing. The company also rewrites operating procedures, forbidding pilots from using the flaps or flying on autopilot in icing conditions. In response, the FAA issues an amendment to their earlier directive, loosening operating restrictions on the ATRs. Most airlines decide not to take any chances. They move their ATRs to the south, where a warmer climate would reduce the risk of ice. The crash at Roselawn set off a flurry of new research into aircraft icing and the conditions that produce it.
There's a lot of weather data out there. Satellites, radars, surface obs, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, the collection of data.
New techniques in forecasting are being developed to show pilots where icing is likely to occur and help them avoid it.
But we're working on ways to get it to the people who need it. Dispatchers at airlines, meteorologists at airlines, and now even into the cockpit itself.
Many of those changes will take time to come into effect. Pilots like Steve Frederick think that time will cost lives.
The problem that exists is that there is no technology available today to the pilots or anyone on the ground to accurately forecast or predict where these situations of bad ice are going to occur. Once these airplanes have been exposed to the bad ice, it's too late because these are no longer airline pilots, they're test pilots. And that airplane can fall out from under them and their passengers without any warning and in the blink of an eye.